this is not just writing code. Like Rue Code Klein and others isn't just writing code. It compiles it, it runs it, it has access to the command line, like it gets the errors, it gets the feedback. So it ran Terraform, deployed, got the errors, fixed the errors, deployed again, got the error, fixed the errors, deployed again, and it works. And then it'll run test cases. So then once it deploys, it will run tests to ensure that the actual instances deployed in AWS work properly. And if it fails, it will see the error, fix the Terraform, redeploy. And by the way, all of this is happening within 5 minutes. So for me, adding Terraform AWS deployment support took me about 10 minutes. Like it did the thing, it wrote it, errored a couple times, fixed it all, deployed it, ran the test, it worked. And by the way, here's what's really interesting.
Today's topic is vibe coding. Yes, you heard that right. We have been talking about vibe coding, at least offline for a long time, on the internet for a while. And personally, I think experienced people like you and I should be more aware of vibe coding than people who are starting today, building prototypes that are probably becoming memes on the internet. So in this episode, Caleb and I talk about what we did for vibe coding, our personal projects, our personal favorite ones. We also spoke about where vibe coding is today, what would it take to get it to production, and what are potential challenges you would see as more people start vibe coding in different departments around the organization, and what that future could look like. If you know someone who's working on solving the vibe coding, and I must say this may not truly be a only security episode, so there is a lot of technology conversation here. Even if you're not a technology person, trust me, you'll still understand a lot of the things we're talking about. My belief is that more experienced people should be aware of vibe coding and getting their hands dirty with the whole AI tools that are there today. How else do you know what you're building and securing in this organization that you're working for? If you know someone who's working on vibe coding or just want to know what that's about, what the gaps in the future are, definitely check this episode out or share this with a colleague who is working on the same. And as always, if you are here for a second or third time watching or listening to an AI cybersecurity podcast episode because you have found it helpful, I would really appreciate if you could take a moment, whether it's on Apple or Spotify or on YouTube or LinkedIn, to hit the follow, subscribe button because it means a lot when he shows his support. It takes only a few seconds, but I appreciate the support. All right, I'll let you enjoy the episode and I'll talk to you soon. Peace. Welcome to another episode of AI Cybersecurity Podcast. Today is a bit of a different vibe. And I use that word intentionally. We're talking about vibe coding, and maybe to set some context, Caleb, do you want to give an idea to people of what is vibe coding?
Yeah, I want to do this episode specifically because it's going to be less security related. We'll talk about security at the end, but fundamentally, people need to like with any new technology, the best way to understand the security impacts of it is to understand the actual thing itself.
Yep.
And so I've tended to find in conversations, everyone has heard of vibe coding. Everyone talks about vibe coding. Everyone repeats mantras of things at which they've heard other people. But actually, when you dig, I find many people have not actually vibe coded themselves. And I think it's really important that you actually do it. And so what in this episode, I really want to talk people through exactly how to set up, go through, vibe code something, ins and outs, tips and tricks, tools to use, sites to go to, just everything that you can do to go do it yourself, because I think it's super important. And by the way, with something like vibe coding, it's really easy to start. And I just don't think people understand how easy it is. So that's why I want to go through it.
Yeah, and I think I was saying this before we started recording. I think, at least for my personal reasons, I definitely would prefer more experienced people use vibe coding instead of people who are just starting off. And maybe that's how we get to that next level of enterprise AI that all of us want to get to. And probably we don't have enough data or people trying to scale it out. So maybe all the experienced people trying it would definitely make a difference. But now that we have set the context for vibe coding, what is a good place to start? Because people have so many options. GitHub Copilot, there is the enterprise options, and then there is the internet options. Which one do you want to start with?
Yeah, I think the first thing is I want people to go download Visual Studio Code. That is, I think, step one. And people are going to, this is not intimidating, right? It is, hey.
I was going to say, people are scared already.
Yeah, it's really simple. Like you just go download it, you open it up, it's going to pull up this thing. And it's really easy to figure out how to go do these things. And actually, once you open up Visual Studio, all you got to do is install an extension, which is similar to installing any sort of Chrome extension, which I think everybody has done.
I'm assuming a lot of people even know what Visual Code is.
Yeah.
You
So
want to
good question. Visual Studio Code is an IDE. So this is what your
I mean, it's
engineers.
more acronyms. Come on, IDE. People like, what is an IDE?
Okay. If first of all, I'm pretty sure if you're listening to this, you've got to at least know what an IDE is.
You would be
There's some
surprised,
level.
but I'm just mindful of people. I don't want to.
Integrated development environment.
Yeah, I know. I was becoming more simple. I was going to say, hey, IDE is a fancy word to say this is where you write code.
Yeah, it's where you write code.
Yeah, literally. Yes.
Literally. And Visual Studio runs on Windows and on Mac. And so now, okay, before I actually even start down this, why should you go and do this and what I'm about to tell you guys to go do? First of all, I want to make sure that I set the tone. If you are a head of engineering or a CTO or even a CISO who used to be technical but never code, and you're like, because I am in that position where it's just, I used to be an engineer. I was a core engineer. I would call myself technical, but the thought of actually going through and writing code and having to look up the syntax, remember these things like, oh, how to do this, how to do that. This is perfect. Vibe coding is perfect for you because you literally never actually have to code, but yet you can see the code. And so this puts power back in your hands and gives you, those people who always used to love coding, but it's just out of your reach due to time, due to the level of effort, due to the cognitive overhead. This puts the power back in your hands. I don't know, emphasize this enough. It is amazing once you start getting into it. So that being the case, and to people who aren't engineers, if you're a product manager especially, this gives you the ability to create things without having to have an engineer. Vibe coding is very much like running an engineering team without you being the engineer. All right, now with all that set, you got to go download Visual Studio Code. You install an extension. Now, there are a bunch of sites and places and tools to use. So before we get started on this, I want to talk a little bit about all the options of tools you can use, why you can go use these tools and what they're made of, because there are a lot of them. In fact, I think in one of our last episodes, Guy, he has a website that you can go to go look up all the codes. Do you remember what
Thistle.io has a website for all the software development tools, for AI assist software development tools. I can put the link in the show notes as well for people.
Yeah, so everyone has probably heard of Cursor. That is an automat. Now, Cursor is not in Visual Studio Code. Cursor is actually a dedicated version of Visual Studio just called Cursor. So when you go download Cursor, it is an entire app, although it is basically cloned version of Visual Studio Code made for their own. There are a whole bunch of others. For example, there's ones called Klein, which is an extension to Visual Studio, RuCode, which is an extension to Visual Studio. These two, by the way, are my favorite. So as we go through, I'm going to talk about specifically RuCode because that is my preferred, I would say, vibe coding tool.
Have you tried Windsurf yet?
Yeah, there's Windsurf, which Windsurf is also its own version of Visual Studio Code, I believe, similar to Cursor. Also pretty good. There's Bolt.new, which I think is more UI centric, more than back end centric. So it's great at generating front ends and UIs. There's Aider, which is more command line. This is if you really like console, there is there. And there's also Claude Code, which is another favorite of mine, which is similar to Aider. It's Aider on steroids, but it is Anthropic's vibe coding tool. It is fantastic, by the way. In fact, I generally will swap between RuCode and Claude Code when I'm doing things.
Have you had a chance to look at the GPT 4.1 yet?
I have not used GPT 4.1 in code yet. I'm generally a Gemini 2.5 person in RuCode, and obviously Claude Code uses Anthropic. They use 3.7, which, by the way, they have I think they've got some special back-end tips and tricks with their client that allows you get some special privileges with Anthropic and Claude 3.7 when you use Claude Code. Yeah, it's quite good.
I personally went down the rabbit hole of Windsurf. I think when we were talking about this particular project, I had this repo in my GitHub, which I have kept vulnerable for a long time intentionally. It's one of those repos that I show off at a conference talk or whatever. Hey, look, this is how you make a vulnerable thing. WinSub was what caught my attention, but I did not look at Gemini 2.5. So I learned something there as well. But maybe, do you reckon it's worthwhile just sharing what do these serve as a purpose? Because I think you mentioned people download Visual Code. You mentioned, hey, now you have to have a cursor, root code, V0.
Yeah.
What would this serve as a purpose? Why this
Yeah.
vibe
So
coding?
generally, I think in the land of what I would call vibe coding, I think there's really good front end products and good back end products. Yeah, generally, the way that I work is I create the back end first. And then what I'll do is I will make it an API, and then I'll generate an API documentation. And then I'll go to a front end, like, for example, lovable bolt.new v0. And then I'll just pass in the description of what the product does and the API specifications, and then say, generate for me the UI front end.
Interesting.
And then I'll keep these projects very independently separate.
Would you believe I go opposite?
What's that?
Or would you believe I go opposite? And maybe because I'm a visual person, I go front end first and then back end.
Oh, you could do either one. Yeah, for example, and actually, this is where we haven't gotten there yet, but we'll get there is the first thing you do in any of these things that I do is I create a product requirements document, which includes a user experience front end. Perfect. So like you want to generate your front end at the beginning with your requirements before you start doing any code. Yeah, which actually goes into maybe some tips. Do you want to finish the list of things, or should we just jump right into?
Now that you have set up the purpose, people understand Visual Code. Hey, I downloaded. It's a part from Microsoft. I picked a tool, whether
pick root code,
favorite or my favorite.
Yeah,
but at least you're in a position to start thinking about a project. But before we go down the list of things, maybe worthwhile talking about what kind of projects, because you have to, to you, what you said, people who could be listening or watching could be project managers who have done a lot of large-scale projects, but at the same time could be technical CISOs or ex-technical recovering CISOs. What are some of the good projects to start off with before we dive into some of these things as well?
I think projects, it's anything and everything. It doesn't really matter what you want to build. I always start off in any project. This has been since I was a kid learning how to code. For some reason, I always start learning things with web crawlers. How do you write a web crawler?
For context, you did write a book around the whole, what was it?
Hacking Web Applications Exposed.
That's right. I can see why, if you were doing this since as a much earlier in your life, I can see why you would have gone down that path of web crawler. So you went down the path of web crawler for vibe coding as well?
Yeah, because the one thing that's great about web crawlers is in its most simplistic form, it's really simple. But web crawlers over a series of iterations can get very complex and can be very simple or can be scaled out at high performance and high distribution and also be very complicated. For example, I always start out with, okay, just crawl a web page. Can I pass with you the maximum amount of web pages? Can I pass how many URLs, how many loops, what's your depth versus your width? Like all of these things are very simple parameters. Yeah. And then what I do, and by the way, we're going off structure, but web crawlers are.
No, but I think it's important because the reason I like what you shared is also because maybe people can choose things that they're most comfortable with to start off with. It's like something they would have done in the past that they're pretty familiar with, even at a foundational level. They can use that as a starting point to vibe code. Because like web crawler is your favorite. For me, it was the whole AppSec pipeline, infra pipeline is the path that I took because that's what I was comfortable with. So people listening and watching, I guess maybe that the lesson here is you don't have to go with either of the examples you and I are sharing, but something that's they understand, they love, they've done many years of it, so they have some idea and maybe use that as a project. Would you agree?
Just like annoying things. Like I'll give you an example of a project. I can't even tell you how many hundreds of thousands of random documents on my Google Drive or in my folders. And I just wanted to find something that would take a snippet out of that file, summarize it, auto-categorize it, and then label it, and then move it into its folder structure. And so I vibe coded a system that did this. It just went through every single file, determined what type of file it is, what is it pertinent to, and then tagged it and then moved it. So for example, it'll read a Excel file and go, oh, this is about finances. Technically, this is about taxes and finances. Therefore, label it as tax finance and move it in the tax finance folder. Like super, super simple utilitarian thing. I vibe coded it.
Right. Great use case as well. And so it could be just a problem that's niggling you right now that, hey, I wonder there was a solution for this. You just make a quick prototype. And I guess, and to be fair, in a normal world, this would have been a bit complicated because you need to be able to talk to Google API, have some kind of an AI model, go through the document, understand it.
You got to get a contractor. You got to get an engineer to go build it.
Yeah. How long did this vibe coding session last, out of curiosity?
3 days.
Really?
I would say. Yeah.
And you had the whole thing.
Yeah. Actually, I had it working. My problem is, I'm like any product manager, is I had it working within the first 3 hours, I would say, but I just kept adding features to it. So
fair.
And then and then we'll go through this, but you refactor it. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you end up doing as you start building a project.
Fair. This is good. So I think we have laid good foundations now. So we have laid foundations for where to start, what kind of projects. Now maybe we can start with a list if you're keen.
Yeah. Okay. We've got basically a list. You can find any of these, but there's a list of both tools that I would consider more front-end tools, like Lovable, V0. Although V0 they all do back-end too, but they're extraordinarily good front-end. They make great UIs. And so I tend to use Rue code or Claude code for back-end, and I make everything API-able. And actually, the way that I've tended to find that I work, and let me give you a little bit of architect. These are some tips of how I structure a project and how I think about it. So before you start doing something. So for example, let's take a web crawler. I'll just make that as the simple example since we used it. How do you start down the road of making a web crawler? The way that I think about it, first of all, is I want to start in somewhat of the most simplistic way possible. And with everything you do, you want to start with a V0. So what is your MVP? So what do you do first in order to do this? In Rue code or in OpenAI or in Claude or any just straight up chat agent, just say, hey, I want you to be a product manager. In Rue code, there is actually a role that you can pick and you can say product manager. And then in the little chat, so what will happen in Rue code and Visual Studio is you'll get this little window and you'll say product manager, and then you'll just have a chat box. And then all you do is you put in there and say, okay, I want to write the simplest MVP web crawler that you can have. Give me a product requirements document, a PRD, for doing this. And by the way, I want to make sure, and the way I always do things is I want to make it run on the command line. So I want it so that you can run the web crawler on the command line. Why do I do command line? I like command line because it's very simple and it has very definitive inputs. And it's a user interface that you can use that later down the road, you can just abstract to an API. And so I like saying, okay, give me a command line version of a web crawler. Give me the PRD of it. Do not do any coding. I always say, make it a PRD, no coding. It's the product manager, just gen it. And also generate the user experience of what are the use cases a user should go through. And like literally that, just make me a web crawler, MVP, product requirements document, and what the user experience should be. And it will auto generate a product requirements document alongside with, no kidding, like ASCII graphics of the way the thing should be. It'll go through the user experience of running the command line. What are the use cases that it should? And I would say for 98%, 99%, that's it. It will be very comprehensive and very complete. Wow. And it will generate this PRD. And you say, great, I want this to be now my MVP of my web crawler. And so call this web crawler 0.1 is generally what I start, or 1.0, what I start with. And then what I then say is once I got that product requirements document done, I then in Rue code, there's an architect mode. So I'll switch to architect mode. You can also just in Claude or whatever, just say you're an architect. And then I paste in the PRD. And I say, based off of this, I want you to break this into engineering development sprints, one feature per sprint, and make sure that there is test cases for each sprint before you call it complete, and keep it simple. Keep it as simple as possible. And then the architect will take the PRD, generate a engineering requirements architecture document, and break up each engineering task into sprints. And they'll call it like sprint for V0.1, V0.2, V0.3, V0.4, all the way up until it gets enough that it says it's complete to get to your 1.0. And by the way, this is 2 prompts right now that I'm talking about. Where
and
you
we already
get
have an engineering roadmap.
That's right.
And a PRD as well.
Correct. I have 2 documents now. I have a PRD, I've got an engineering roadmap. And then that is it. Now I basically save those files.
Yeah.
These files are done. And then I tell RuCode, I switch to engineering mode. I say, okay, now you're in coding mode. Go ahead and reference the product requirements, engineering requirements, and follow that and build version 0.1. And then I personally YOLO it. So in every one of these vibe coding, they've got this little window that shows, do you want to ask for permission to create files, edit files, all these? And I turn all of those on. I just say, don't ask my permission for anything. Just go. And by the way, this works really well. Where like Guy was saying, hey, it's good for prototypes and V1s. Like, you don't ever do this for enterprise.
Oh yeah, I mean,
bases. But
there should be a warning before this episode is launched as well.
Yeah.
Things discussed in this episode, please do not do this in production.
Do not do this in production. But if you're an engineer working in production, then you already know this. So none of this is going to be new to you. But like, I just basically select YOLO it, and then it just goes. And I'm no kidding, usually at these stages, you could just walk away. I will walk away, go eat lunch or go watch TV. It's like the old days when you used to get your code to compile.
Oh,
like you just go do whatever you want. And you'll come back and that thing will be done. And it will go through the sprints one by one, write the test cases. Although I will be, to those of you who have been vibe coding before, I will tell you, vibe coding and unit test cases can get a little wonky. So you got to be careful about the way it does tests, because it does things like, okay, you'll write a test case, and what AI will do, because it cheats, if it for some reason it can't it'll write a test properly, and if the test doesn't pass, it'll just rewrite the test so it just it passes based on the product.
Technically, it created the rule, so it can break it as well.
Exactly, which is not what it's supposed to do. Which, by the way, there is a QA mode that I will switch to in RuCode. I'll create a QA mode, which is dedicated just QA, that it can only write test cases and it cannot modify the main code. And that is one that I'll use too, which is a little bit better tip for doing testing. But this thing it'll write it. And so you'll come back and you'll have a fully working web crawler that works, does exactly what the PRD stated. And by the way, when you tell it update your task, it'll go through that original documents and put check marks on all of the things that it completed on each sprint that it completes. And then what I'll do is then I'll go, okay, I've got a version 1.0. I'll go back, and if it works, I'll go back to the product requirements and say, I want to build now a version 2.0. Here are the kinds of requirements I want in it. And I'll tell it, here are the, like, for example, I want the crawler to be multi-threaded now. I want it to be deployable on AWS. I want it to have a vector database so it stores the results so I can AI chat with any website that I crawl. I want to be like, for example, I put a feature in L1 that says, before a crawl is complete, I want to tell it in English language the topic or when it sees something complete. I'll give you a great example. One of the things that you find all the time is in engineering or development documentation, it's all these web pages and docs, right? Yeah. So sometimes what I'll say is crawl this web page, but when you see anything that's only crawl the development engineering docs. If you see anything that's not a doc, then call it complete. And it will go through every page and then do a comparison to see whether it's an engineering doc or not on how to, and if it's not, it'll throw it away. And when it thinks it's done, then it'll just stop.
Oh,
I'll add this in my crawling product requirements for version 2.0. It'll do the exact same thing, build out a PRD for web crawler 2.0. I go to the architect, I break it into its sprints, and then I take it the same thing, I go right back in it and I say, okay, go follow these documents, and it just goes. And by and large, I would say I got to a 2.0 and it took me, 3 days to go through a time where you could get all the way to a 2.0. I actually did a video recording of me doing it in Klein.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it took me a total of 3 hours once I broke it up.
Well, you where you were going. So people who are watching or listening to this, if they were to do this, I guess maybe on a weekend project, if they want to, 2-3 hours, give tops, and they should be able to get to a point where they have a V1 or V2 ready as well.
Oh yeah, oh totally. Yeah, and then what you'll do is what you'll find out is as the project starts getting bigger, this is where things start running. So this is why people say don't do this. It's great for prototypes, but not for anything else. So as you start vibe coding things, like it'll work and it will run. I'll give you an example. Once I get the thing running in command line and it works, so generally a couple days worth of work, you've got a pretty small project, but it's definitely not a script anymore, right? Like you've got, I'd say a handful, 30 something different scripts or code files that are there. And so now when you start doing things, you'll start running out of context memory, and you have to manage that a little bit, be more specific about what you're doing. And you'll want to refactor. So now that I've got this as a command line argument, for example, I want to now make this in the cloud and an API. So I'll tell it we need to refactor our code. And so same thing, I will say we need to break each refactor into a sprint and test to make sure our functionality works. And this is where things can get hairy, which is why in Visual Studio, what's nice is you can watch the code being changed. So as vibe coding is happening, you're seeing the code running and being changed and edited. So you can watch what the AI is doing to it. And if you are any sort of engineer, you can see where sometimes AI will get into what I call rat holes, right? Where it'll get an error, or it'll do something that says, oh, we need to write an API to, I don't know, pass like auth into a crawler. Yeah. And you can see it recycling itself into adding multi inner loops of different auths and you're like, what is it doing? And you have to like stop it. And you have to say, wait a minute, you are adding multiple types of auth on top of itself. This is wrong. And of course it'll go, oh, you're right. I'm sorry. And I have to tell it, delete all code related to auth and start over. And so if you're watching it, this is where things can start getting wonky.
Maybe this is what Gaipo mentioned on the recording we did with him as well, that if you only work on a specific task, vibe coding works really well. It just does that one particular tiny task. To your point, the prototype that you're looking at works really well. But the moment you start adding features and layers to your prototype, suddenly you're in this world of it can go in any direction. And I think which is kind of what you're describing with this. Funny enough, at B-Sides SF, I was having a conversation with the Anthropic SOC team. We did the live panel there. And one of the things that was really interesting that was called out by the SOC person, I think Jackie Bao is the name.
Yep.
So Jackie was talking about how they're using hallucination as a way to come up with detection rules for like certain scenarios. This rabbit hole, for lack of a better word, that it went into could be good. I think that's where I'm going with this, where, to your point, maybe not in the authentication context, you don't want the authentication to go wrong, but in scenarios where I wonder what other features can I add to make this better. To I guess you obviously have a lot of experience. You're able to use that to build on the PRD and engineering roadmap and everything.
Oh, yeah. If you don't know what features, you can just ask it, and it will tell you all the things that it should add to it. And by the way, again, 98% of the time, it's right.
That's what, I mean, to me, because I used it you know how a lot of conferences have capture the flag. And a lot of the time they're hacky. They're not really the best. They try and make it big enough that they can handle volume. So I went down that rabbit hole, made a cloud security capture the flag. I didn't end up at the authentication part because there was no authentication for mine. So I didn't end up going as deep as you did. But what was interesting in my little experiment that I did with the AWS pieces, it would hit error. It would make up scenarios which looked right. And I would look at them going, that should technically be possible. There's no policy like that in an Amazon context. It
Right.
sounded like, oh yes, this is definitely it. I'm just trying to apply it. I went down the rabbit hole of trying to find it, but never found it. Did you have those experiences as well, where
Yeah.
it would link libraries which do not exist?
I didn't. It does do that to some extent. For example, I'll give you a great example. In my more advanced versions of the crawler, it wrote Terraform to deploy them because now it used serverless functions to do its crawling engines. And it wrote a whole bunch of Terraform code to go do the deployments. And actually, what really surprised me is it only failed Terraform twice. But it used and by the way, just for people to understand also, I don't think people get it. This is not just writing code. Like Code Klein and others isn't just writing code. It compiles it, it runs it, it has access to the command line, like it gets the errors, it gets the feedback. So it ran Terraform, deployed, got the errors, fixed the errors, deployed again, got the error, fixed the errors, deployed again, and it works. And then it'll run test cases. So then once it deploys, it will run tests to ensure that the actual instances deployed in AWS work properly. And if it fails, it will see the error, fix the Terraform, redeploy. And by the way, all of this is happening within 5 minutes. So for me, adding Terraform AWS deployment support took me about 10 minutes. Like it did the thing, it wrote it, errored a couple times, fixed it all, deployed it, ran the test, it worked. And by the way, here's what's really interesting. The permissions on the AWS Terraform were largely least privilege.
Oh, really?
Yes. It was not wide open privs in the Terraform.
Okay,
which, by the way, is way better than me or any senior engineer, by the way, on their AWS.
I would have not thought it would do that. Okay, so which is actually to your point, it's an interesting call out because many people just assume by default it creates security holes. Secure code and security holes by default. But in your experience so far, you found the Terraform, obviously, okay, I do want to add a caveat. We did give it credentials and go ballistic as well. So I don't know how many people would do that in their own environment. But in spite of all of that, it still did the right thing in the versions that were created for you in your particular product that you were building or the prototype that you were building.
Yeah, by and large, 98% of all the permissions were least privileged permissions in AWS when it built the Terraform.
Okay.
And by the way, I didn't have to worry about any of it recursively just figured it out and then deployed it and worked.
I think something worthwhile calling out here, because a lot of people may assume this is only for software developers. And I think what you and I just spoke about is not even a software developer. It's a security engineer could do it. A cloud engineer could do it. And
because you're managing an engineer. So what this is now, you're managing a quote unquote engineer by just telling it, hey, don't do it this way, do it that way. I'll give you a great example. In version 2 of my web crawler, I converted it to Rust.
Okay.
And so like you just tell it, hey, convert this or convert it to Go, and it'll just do it. Right.
My God.
And I just say convert it to Rust and make sure all the test cases work. And it just does.
That is
it just, I mean, by and large, you think I'm oversimplifying it. And yes, to some degree I am, but no, I'm not. There's a little bit of, oh, you messed up here. Oh, you a little bit, but like maybe 2 or 3 times. And the thing that was most amazing to me is I was on the floor of my kid's bedroom with my laptop, and I was playing with my son Cars. And I would just go over to the right when I saw the vibe coding work, and I'd see something. I'd be like, oh, no, do it this way. And I go back to playing with my son. It was on the laptop.
You could have it, I guess, to your point of this. I think what you're saying, that you're managing a person, which is just happens, it has been given a task, just goes and does its thing. I think it's a good example. But I would also encourage people to not be putting themselves into a hole that it has to be a software product. It could be anything. You gave the example of Google Drive earlier. I was giving the example of a capture the flag because that's what was interesting for me. But people could take it into their cloud environments, their on-premise environments, any kind of code. I remember this company that I invested in ages ago, and I remember because the first founding engineers wrote the code in Rust. That's why I laughed at the Rust part. and we could not find anyone in entire Melbourne to who wrote Trust because everyone had moved on to Node.js.
Yeah.
And this problem would have not existed back then, that we had to refactor the entire code to Node.js just to hire more people. So this
No,
just changes the game.
and actually, I use Code and other things just to do interrogation of repos. So you can download an open source repo and Q&A with it like an engineer, right? Or you can ask it, hey, generate more detailed documentation about how this thing does authentication. And it will just go and do it for you. So you can use it like Q&A on any repo. You don't actually have to use it to code. You could just load up your stuff and say, hey, I want to know how auth is done in this repo. And that, what does the code do here? How does the code interact with serverless or Lambdas? And it will tell you. But just, you can really do almost, it is an engineer. It is a full-time dedicated engineer for you in quote unquote teams, because you can, again, architect modes, product manager modes, debug modes. Like, I'll give you a great example. Many times when you're coding, you'll run into bugs. Yep. And in these bugs, it can't figure it out. Like, it'll just keep rotating. And this is when AI code starts getting wonky. Like, it'll start changing its foundational code to adopt to the error versus fixing the error. But actually, if you change sometimes changing models works. So I have a debug mode in Code, and in Code you can change the setting to change models. So for example, DeepSeek and Grok, for some reason, I think are really good debuggers. And so I set my debug to Grok model or to your DeepSeek model, and it will go through and then use that model and look at the code and then help you debug it and say, oh, this is the fix. And then I'll switch it back to code mode. It'll take the fix, implement it, and then run and keep moving. And so there's a lot of interesting power in the way you can play with both the models you're using, the settings that you use, the prompts that you use, the configurations that you use. Yeah. All of these things make big differences around how you
now that we have opened the floodgates for being more project manager like or product manager like and adding features, how about adding some agents into this as well?
This is a great transition. So let's take the bug and issue problem. Yep. You want to know the best way to solve most issues is for your vibe coding session, like Code, to have access to the internet and search for the issue before trying to fix it. So what you do is you use MCP. And so inside of Code or Klein or any of these, there is an MCP registry button. It literally is like you click on it, and it will list you all the top MCPs people use. And you find an MCP, like for example, Perplexity. I use Perplexity's MCP, and you just click install, and it installs it. And then now your AI coder has access to Perplexity. And then what you do is in your prompt, or you can just do it live in your chat window. I tend to put it in my prompt and say, hey, before you run into fixing an issue, I want you to ask Perplexity for the most up-to-date information and then try to fix the issue. And then what it'll do is, it runs into an error. It'll then immediately call Perplexity, search for the error, parse the results, take the information, then fix the error. And so this is way better than it just as the model itself trying to go and figure this out.
Oh, okay. So Stack Overflow is not it's not going obsolete.
I don't know. That's a whole different debate.
No, but I guess, right. So we've got the agents. We've got the agent searching for the internet to solve the problem. So why MCP? Why not just a Zapier or something or the other?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there is these. How do you vibe code? And so what I think, just to recap vibe coding, it's super easy to do. You could go to, by the way, just to note, if you don't want to download Visual Studio, I highly recommend sort of the model at which I talked about, because it removes a lot of issues and struggles you might have by building a PRD, building an engineering requirements, doing things in sprints. But let's say you don't want to do any of that. You can go directly to Lovable V0 bolt.new without an IDE and just type in something and then just have it go. But let's say you don't need to vibe code something. Let's just say you want to do something super simple. Like you want to say, what I want to do is anytime someone emails me, or let's say, actually, this is a real use case I did. If someone adds a calendar, an invite to my calendar, take the attendees, take the attendee, look it up in HubSpot, the attendee information, grab the LinkedIn, look up the person's LinkedIn, summarize their information, paste it into your calendar invite. So before you go into a meeting, you can see immediately who that person is in their background.
Wow.
Okay, so how would you do that without coding? Actually, any of these, if Zapier, there's a bunch, N8N,
Yep.
what's the other ones that you do?
I just know the make. No.
Oh, relay.app. Relay.app
Relay.
is good. Make.com is another good one. Almost all of these, although I will tell you, Zapier, I will say, used to be, I would say, the least configurable out of all of these, but now I think is the most configurable. Zapier is better than Relay, better than all of these so far that I found. They have way more integrations, way more detailed integrations. Like, for example, you go to Relay, and let's say you want to integrate with HubSpot. Relay may give you 8 different ways of integrating with HubSpot, versus you go to Zapier, and there are like 35 different kinds of areas you can use inside of HubSpot. So
you can write your own as well.
You write your own flow, so you can then drag and drop. And Zapier is way more than just what people think it is in the old days, which was, oh, do this, then do that, right? Yeah. Zapier is entire workflows and agents that will go. So you can then say, oh, take the thing on the calendar. Anytime a new calendar is invited, grab the participants from that invite, go ahead and call HubSpot or your CRM, search for that person, get the results, pass it to OpenAI or Anthropic, summarize the results, edit the existing calendar, update that calendar, save it, done workflow. You can do all of this in almost any one of those apps.
Wow. Okay. So, to your point then, you chose MCP because of the kind of tasks that you're looking at. Yep. But people, if depending on what they're doing, they can naturally go down the path of using Zapier with any extension they want. I don't know, could be like hey, send a Slack message or Teams message or whatever, because I have done coding, my V0 is ready, go find me.
Yeah, Zapier even goes further with agents. Like, you can say, don't just connect to HubSpot. I want you to do a deep research using Perplexity on this person, because I want to know about their personal background. So you can then in Zapier go create an AI research agent. Yep. And it will go Google or call Perplexity using this person's name and any information you have from the calendar invite, and then say, I only want to research and identify personal information, hobbies, family, something like that could be a conversation starter. And it will go do the research, find all that information, sum it up, pass it, update the calendar. So like for the everyday person, if you want to use agents, like a lot of these tools will let you do it now without any coding, completely just click.
Wow. And maybe worthwhile saying, right? Because people talk about multi-agents, chain multiple agents together, and people could obviously make it as complex as they want or as simple as they want as well. In all the recommendations that we have spoken about so far, and hey, start here, popular tools, things that we enjoyed, things we did not enjoy, MCP, AI agent, do people need to, I guess maybe as they go through this, do you still believe it's not at a point where if you had a few more days, you could make it production ready?
You mean, so you're talking about now, when we think about vibe coding, let's talk about production level vibe coding.
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah. So as in the next level of maturity after this, we've gone through this, spent 3 days on it. I'm super proud of myself, product manager. I heard the episode and went in, did my prototype. And now, apart from a few kinks here and there, I think I'm ready to show it to my engineering team or whoever. But in all the effort you put in, what does it take to go from V0, V2 to a production ready?
Yeah, so let's make a clear distinction between personal fun projects that I'm coding on my own to, I'm a product manager in a company and I want to build a product, and then go and
what's the gap between?
And just by the way, I just want to say my empathies to the engineering team who's going to get, in this age, going to get tons of inbounds from everyone in their company saying, look at my app that I built. Can we push this in prod?
Oh, yeah.
Which,
I
by the
vibe
way, every
coded while
engineer is
playing with
going,
my
oh my
son.
God.
Yeah, I vibe coded while playing with my son. That's when I did
Yeah.
it.
And then they're like, can you push this in prod? And engineers being like, just stop.
What do you mean? It works. Look at all the
It
test
works.
cases. You never give me a test case. I got 25 test cases here.
But here is what I think is going to be an interesting challenge. Okay, so let's take this into two pieces.
Yep.
First of all, how do you take something vibe coded by a non-engineer and make it engineering ready and production ready? That is what production ready is very different from company to company. Every company has a culture of what they deem to be production ready. And thankfully, they've got the gates at where employees can't just randomly bring things up and then go deploy it. Otherwise, it would be an absolute disaster. I think that there's going to be a lot of people. What is production ready is very different. I think anything can be production ready. The question is, who is it going to serve? What customer is it going to serve? What product is it integrated to? What are your requirements? There's a lot of this that takes place, which I think it's less relevant to define what is production ready, but more relevant to talk about how are engineering teams and enterprises going to somehow manage the influx of people building these apps and saying they want to push them to production. When you have product managers or marketing or salespeople building things in a way that help them solve problems, my guess is that the engineering and the enterprise are going to get enough pressure to say, how do we enable this creativity and the ability for employees to produce applications that solve problems in a way that is safe and is reliable. So I think that there is a bigger challenge here, which is how are enterprise going to manage that? Because the first instinctive response to this is no, you guys are playing with toys, which, by the way, is the right response today. You are playing what you think is a product may be useful to you, like an Excel macro is useful, but this is not software that we're going to deploy. However, that is not the right long-term answer. The right long-term answer is, how do we embrace the creativity and ability for non-engineers to build these applications, but do it in a way that allows them to do it safely in a reliable way, is going to be a really interesting challenge. Because you actually, in an enterprise, want to enable a product manager or a salesperson to build a tool or a service that helps them solve the problem that they have on hand, right? Like when you look at enterprise applications, like why do we pay SAP, Salesforce, Oracle, all these mega amounts of money? It's for customized flows that sales and marketing people need to do to write their stuff because they know the problem they need to solve most. So if they start writing their own versions of this, how do you enable the framework that allows them to do this with freedom without getting engineering having to go through and test and validate it and read it? That'll be really fun. That'll be a fun problem.
Maybe a possible solution, and this is obviously coming off. There was a similar challenge in the cloud landscape as well, where there was a sprawl of tools, cloud products. People were building applications in cloud, and you could had absolute zero visibility into what they were doing. And maybe that could somehow put some light in this context for some people. And maybe some people are already doing this as well, at least based on the conversation that I had. Having a standard paved road for, hey, if you are building a prototype, these are the things it should comply to, and this is the sandbox environment where you build it in, run it in, where you can integrate this in. Maybe lessons from some of that can apply here as well, where if organizations can come up with a standardized part, and obviously I'm not saying this is the only right answer. This is something that I saw earlier and seems to work at scale as well. At least it reduces the, for lack of a better word, bleeding to an extent, where you're not bleeding out prototypes left and center. At least, okay, if there's a standard path that my AI governance council agrees on that should comply with everyone, at least there's a paved path. People walk down that paved path, you get to go through the different stages to get to production. But if you don't follow the paved path, then you're sandboxed forever. You don't graduate to whatever the next level is.
Yeah, it is, you are right in the sense that there needs to be some paved path that's set. What's interesting is going to be this environment is not quite production, right? It's an internal enterprise environment, or even some product managers are going to say, you should push my feature into a prod product. But here's the thing is, the problem isn't the fact that a product manager, let's just take an example. It's not that a product manager can't build with AI a small utilitarian app that solves a real problem that is able to run in production, right? I firmly believe a PM can do this and do it well. The issue relies on the fact that once he pushes it to, let's call it internal production, because this is not going to be something served to customers, but served to quote unquote customers of employees of the company, the workforce, who maintains it? The problem has always been, hey, when people start using this thing and people have bugs, feature requests, reliability, then you have, does this product manager now become responsible for maintaining and supporting the small application at which he custom built? And really, that's the major pain. Is the answer to that is no. He will not be supporting and maintaining that thing. So then who does that responsibility lie to? Then it lies on engineering. And engineering is going to be, right?
Literally. This is actually on the money with the DevOps methodology that everyone's adopted with Agile as well, where whoever makes it is responsible for maintaining it. It's like a plant. You're just watering it, you're making sure it grows and has a healthy life and everything. I 100% support the idea. And I think maybe people can take that off, and maybe a combination of a paved path, but also if you want a prototype feature to go into production, you are responsible for it moving forward. Every time it goes down, requires debugging, you leave your position and just go do this. As long as that is acceptable, you can go ahead. It would only last as long as the person is in the company, but hey, at least there would be some time.
Again, you could say in this day and age, you could say AI is the answer to this, because it will at this stage, AI, is it in a place where it can manage operations, and can it manage and auto update and deal with bug fixes? If I filed a support ticket, can AI automatically take that support ticket, analyze it, update the code, and then repush? It's plausible, right? It's plausible that maintenance and updating of things could be done through AI.
Backlogs could be cleared by that.
Yeah, backlogs are going to get cleared. That is, and for these kinds of applications, these internal workforce applications, also the definition internally as to when does it become a critical, right? If you as a product manager build this thing, but then all of a sudden 80% of your HR and finance team is now using it in their workflows, is that now considered critical? Production service. It's just, there's a lot of these cultural, political role responsibilities that would be interesting, because vibe coding something is easy, maintaining and managing it is not.
Yeah. And maybe to where we started this, the motivation for this episode was to encourage more people to do vibe coding, because they should understand what's involved in it, so that you can't really protect what you can't see. So at least you need to know how this thing works, even in today's day and age, where it may be V0 for what it is today and maybe become much better tomorrow. But having an understanding of that is essential for people to know what they're up against. And maybe that brings to the security point as well, in terms of the security leaders listening to this. I think we already spoke about probably the fire hose of prototypes are going to come out from every department, wanting people to put into engineering, coming for security review, and maybe asking people to have security people involved with prototyping. What are some of the other security considerations with vibe coding? And I guess maybe now we flip to the CISO hat or to the security leader hat for what would be security things that we should think about beyond just hey, I have a lot of prototypes that I have to completely ignore, or unless they manage it. Other security thoughts that come to mind as people look at the explosion of vibe coding in their organization or prototyping. Should you consider shadow? I don't know there's a shadow prototype thing, but if there was a shadow prototype, do we give a dedicated environment? Have you thought about that as well?
Yeah, so there's obviously in security, you have to think about a lot of things. But if you just let's just start from SDLC, starting at left and moving to the right.
Yeah.
I actually believe what the security team is probably going to do first is they're going to create their own security MCP server. Why? What is that going to do? That means anytime you code or run something in your IDE, there's an MCP server that will automatically analyze the things that you're writing, make calls to ensure that it's giving you the right building blocks. Here's a great example. Oh, I want to write this app that will allow an employee to access this field in Salesforce. In your MCP server, you're going to say any authentication or OAuth that's required to any of these types of services, call me and I will provide to you the code block that is needed in order for you to do this authentication. And then the security MCP will deliver these secure code blocks and frameworks automatically while the app is being written so that it can automatically give you the right secure frameworks and paved roads to whatever app that you're building. That's probably number one. Number two, obviously, it will go through your standard quote unquote static analysis to verify and make sure that there's no other big problems. And then I think shifting more to the right, now it becomes to this, okay, what am I including in my libraries to ensure that, by the way, which I think in the MCP server, you'll already say these are the libraries that you can include, everything else you cannot include. You'll go to then deploy. Deploy is interesting. To me, there is definitely going to be this interesting segmentation, is my belief, between prod and dev. Like right now, if you think of a normal engineering company, you have your sort of dev environment. You quote unquote should have a staging environment, although staging is generally a shit show in startups. And then your prod environment. And prod environment is strictly, or at least mostly, made up of customer facing services and dependencies, right?
Yeah.
However, I think as we get bigger into vibe coding, services being built for the internal workforce will grow, right? Because people will want to build and customize their own services to solve their own problems, which means that I wonder if you start having a different environment that is a workforce production environment that is similar to a sense that says, oh, okay, I'm going to split customer prod from workforce prod. And workforce prod will have its own development pipeline at which then goes through its own set of requirements. So before I can go deploy something that serves my workforce or my internal employee base, it's going to go through this workforce prod. And the security requirements there will clearly be different than anything that would be required for customer prod environment.
Yeah. I like the workforce prod analogy, especially for internal facing apps. I was also going to say, in terms of how many companies go down this path, that would be really interesting to see as well, because as you called out, anyone who goes down the path of prototyping is probably starting an engineering function in their department, whether it's HR, finance, whoever. And in a way, it's a good thing that every department would have an engineering department as well, which is not a bad thing. And maybe this creates that space. And we, again, have a sprawl of engineers everywhere, and we're trying to figure out. It could because the way I see it at the moment, most people already say, hey, my workload is way too much. I don't have time for this, whatever. They'll go for a SaaS application or a third party, pay the money, and let them solve that. That's what Salesforce ended up doing for a lot at scale. And
yeah, this is already today a common challenge in larger organizations, right? Yes. Which is, do you centralize, what we call that corporate engineering, right? Which is, do you centralize those engineers into a corporate engineering workforce that is run by IT and the sort of corporate workforce area, or do you let the domains of expertise own them? So HR will own an engineering HR function, finance will own a finance engineering function. By and large, I've seen most decentralized versions of those fail, because the problem is the finance team and the HR team have no idea how to hire engineers, no idea what makes a good engineer, no idea how to create an engineering culture, no idea how to follow standard best practices. And so generally those are centralized as a corporate engineering function under the IT because usually this goes on the workforce area. And then people listening who work in companies will also debate whether corporate IT understands engineering either.
Well,
but that is a different topic for a different discussion.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, centralizing that will allow you to enforce the right training, interviews, who gets promoted, who doesn't get promoted, how do you keep leveling the same. A lot of these more corporate policies then have a better way to be managed. And then you separate them out and you just dedicate a team for engineering, a team for HR.
Yeah.
And that's how it works right now.
Yeah. I think I like where we are at towards the end of this episode as well, because we spoke about where people can start today, how can they get to a point where they have a V0, V1, what's the gap between them getting to production. And towards the end, we also spoke about the two possible futures this could have in an organization from a change perspective as well. Hopefully, for people who end up doing prototyping or vibe coding after this, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section for what you guys do. Maybe share your project with us if you're vibe coding one. But otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to hearing about all the vibe coding you do when we talk to you next. But thanks so much for your time, and talk to you next episode. See ya. Thank you so much for listening and watching this episode of AI Cybersecurity Podcast. If you want to hear more episodes like these or watch them, you can definitely find them on our YouTube for AI Cybersecurity Podcast, or also on our website, www.aicybersecuritypodcast.com. And if you are interested in cloud, which is also a sister podcast called Cloud Security Podcast, where on a weekly basis, we talk to cloud security practitioners, leaders who are trying to solve different clients' cloud security challenges at scale across the 3 most popular cloud provider. You can find more information about Cloud Security Podcast on www.cloudsecuritypodcast.tv. Thank you again for supporting us. I'll see you next time. Peace.